When I pulled up to the old farmhouse in Spokane, the gravel crunching beneath my tires sounded almost louder than the laughter drifting across the yard. Family reunions are supposed to bring warmth, that sense of belonging you can fall back into like a familiar chair. But as I stepped out of my car and looked across the field of parked trucks and sedans, the weight in my chest reminded me of something else. Sometimes a family reunion is just a reminder of how far you've drifted. The Corin farm hadn't changed in decades. Same red barn with the paint peeling just a little more, same wide porch lined with rocking chairs, and the same weathered photographs of ancestors framed inside the living room. Folks clung to tradition here. I paused for a moment, breathing in the mix of cut grass and barbecue smoke. "Evadne, you finally made it!" My cousin Lorraine was the first to greet me. She smiled, but her eyes flickered with a polite distance, the kind of look you give someone you don't quite know how to place. "Flight wasn't bad," I answered, though I had driven. She asked about my teaching job in Portland, nodding with that rehearsed sympathy people reserve for careers they don't think much of. A few steps behind me, the sound shifted. Car doors slammed, heels clicked against the driveway. Calvera had arrived. My sister-in-law walked in with her polished smile, her arm looped confidently through my brother Cassian's. She hadn't even reached the porch before the voices rose. "There she is!" And bodies leaned in to hug her, showering compliments like confetti. "She's incredible," someone whispered loud enough for me to hear. "A partner at her firm already." I pressed my lips together, reminding myself that silence doesn't mean weakness. I slipped off my jacket, walked inside, and blended into the background as everyone circled around Calvera. She had always known how to own a room. Me, I was learning how to survive in it. By midday, the family gathered under the old oak tree for the annual photograph. The photographer, hired specially this year, adjusted his lens and started arranging us like chess pieces. Parents in the middle, children close, everyone else around them. I stepped forward, taking my place near my parents. My mother gave me a quick smile before shifting her body toward Calvera. The photographer frowned slightly. "Let's get Cassian's wife front and center. Yes, right next to Mom and Dad." Hands brushed against my back, nudging me. My aunt's voice followed, gentle but firm. "Step aside, honey. Let's make sure Calvera is in the middle." I shuffled over, the grass damp beneath my shoes. Then another cousin edged in. By the time everyone settled, I was half-turned, barely visible at the corner of the frame. I stared at the camera's blinking light, realizing what the arrangement meant. I had been born into this family, yet today I looked like the guest. When the shutter clicked, it felt less like a picture and more like a verdict. Lunch followed in the long dining hall, the wooden tables lined with potato salad, baked beans, fried chicken, and pies cooling on the counter. Conversation bounced around like ping-pong balls, always finding a way to land on Calvera's accomplishments. She closed a big case, she'd been featured in a law journal, she knew the mayor personally. Between bites of coleslaw, Uncle Henry chuckled and leaned back. "Remember when Evadne was little? Always sick, always missing school. We joked she should have been wrapped in bubble wrap." Laughter burst from the table. Forks tapped plates in rhythm with the chuckles. "She fainted during the 4th of July parade once," another cousin added. "We thought she'd melt before the ice cream did." I forced a smile, though my stomach tightened. They remembered every stumble but none of the steps I had taken on my own. Family will always remember your mistakes longer than your victories, I thought, staring down at my plate. Across the table, Calvera's cheeks glowed with pride as someone praised her for being the rock of this family. I reached for water, swallowing the bitterness before it slipped into my voice. When the meal ended, I slipped out onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath my sandals, cicadas buzzed in the summer heat, and for the first time that day, I let my face drop. My career as a teacher, shaping young minds every year, didn't hold a candle to the gleam of Calvera's courtroom triumphs. I leaned against the railing, whispering words to myself. Comparison is the thief of joy. Roosevelt had been right. I straightened my shoulders. I wasn't going to beg for acknowledgement. Instead, I watched. I listened. I told myself that silence was not surrender. It was strategy. Evening settled slowly, the horizon streaked orange and purple. Laughter floated through the windows, stories retold inside as if the day had been flawless. I lingered near the hallway, my hand trailing along the wallpaper I had known since childhood. I thought the day's humiliation was enough. Being nudged out of the family photo, reduced to a story of weakness, ignored in favor of someone who had married in. It stung. But as I leaned there, the sound of voices carried from a nearby room, sharp enough to make me still. I hadn't expected the night to hand me something worse. I thought being pushed out of the family photo was painful, until I heard what Calvera whispered behind closed doors. Dinner in the main hall had always been the centerpiece of these reunions. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, covered in white linen and lined with dishes steaming with food my mother had spent days preparing. By the time we all gathered, the air smelled of roast beef, potatoes drenched in butter, and freshly baked bread. I stepped into the room last, scanning the arrangement. My mother and father, Brannick and Alicia, were seated at the head table. Calvera stood nearby, her hand resting lightly on my brother Cassian's arm. The moment the chairs were pulled out, I saw it. Calvera was ushered to the seat directly between my parents, her smile lighting up the table as though she had earned the honored position by birth. "Evadne," one of my cousins called, waving me toward the far end. "Would you mind sitting near the kitchen? We need space here for Calvera." I felt my face stiffen into a polite smile. I walked to the chair nearest the door where waitstaff carried dishes in and out, trays rattling. I could almost smell the dishwater. I sat, smoothed my napkin across my lap, and kept my voice steady when a relative leaned over to ask, "Still teaching? Must be rewarding, though not easy to get by these days." "Yes," I replied simply, though inside I thought, I grew up in this house, and tonight I sit like an outsider. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Seating revealed status, and my status had quietly been demoted. Conversation swirled around Calvera as she launched into a story about her latest case. My parents listened intently, nodding, while I cut into my meal in silence. After the plates had been cleared, the gift exchange began. This had always been my mother's favorite part, tokens of appreciation, little ways we honored the ones who raised us. I carried my gift carefully, a framed collage of family photographs I had pieced together. Childhood birthdays, summer vacations at the lake, my grandmother holding me as a baby. I had spent weeks choosing each photo, arranging them to tell our story. Before I could present it, Calvera rose gracefully, setting a large, ribboned box before my parents. "We wanted you to have something elegant," she said. With a flourish, she revealed a luxury wine set, crystal glasses shimmering under the dining hall lights. Gasps of admiration followed. "How beautiful!" my mother exclaimed, lifting a glass to the light. "This will look perfect in the dining cabinet." Applause, nods, and appreciative murmurs filled the room. When my turn came, I offered my frame with a quiet smile. My father took it, glanced briefly, and set it down beside the table. "That's sweet," he said, his tone kind but distracted. Within seconds, the conversation shifted back to Calvera's gift. My frame sat by the corner, barely noticed. I stared at it, then at the wine set glittering in the center of the table. I gave them a piece of history, but they only saw price tags. There's an old saying, money talks, but love is often silent. I swallowed hard, keeping my chin high, but the ache of invisibility pressed into my chest. As laughter returned and dessert was served, I excused myself and slipped onto the porch. The evening air cooled my flushed skin. Cicadas sang in the fields, the scent of honeysuckle floating faintly in the breeze. I sank onto a rocking chair, letting its wooden frame creak beneath me. I remembered the days when my handmade gifts, scrapbooks, knitted scarves, were once praised. As a child, my drawings had been taped proudly to the refrigerator door. But somewhere along the way, admiration had shifted. Now, it wasn't about meaning, but prestige. It wasn't about the thought, but the cost. Leaning forward, I whispered into the night. Too many people spend money they haven't earned, to buy things they don't want, to impress people they don't like. Will Rogers had been right. Anger simmered low, but so did determination. I wouldn't cry, not here. Instead, I would watch. I would learn. If silence had been their way of sidelining me, I would use it as my weapon too. When I returned inside, the noise hit me again. Laughter, stories retold, chairs scraping. I started down the hallway toward the restroom, but I paused. A voice carried through the thin walls. Calvera's voice, unmistakable, low but firm, speaking on the phone. "They adore me here," she said. I froze, every muscle tightening. "Yes, Mom, it's true. Evadne? She's no competition. She's nothing but a background figure." My breath caught. I stood perfectly still, my hand resting on the wall for balance. Invisible was painful enough. But being erased, that cut deeper. Her words rolled over me, each one carving into the space where I had once believed family meant protection. I thought about the seating at dinner, my chair by the kitchen. I thought about my collage shoved to the side, and now, hearing her dismiss me so completely, I realized all of it was intentional. I pressed myself closer to the wall, straining to hear the last fragments. "Don't worry, Mom. They'll never give her anything important. She's a burden." My heart raced, the word lodging itself in my chest like a stone. I gripped the wallpaper, trembling, not from fear, but from clarity awakening in me. Inside the dining hall, laughter carried on, the sound of clinking forks and easy jokes. But for me, the night had already split open. And then I heard the words that would change everything. "She's nothing but a burden." I walked back into the dining hall with my hands clasped tightly, forcing them not to tremble. The glow of the chandelier scattered across polished glasses and silverware, laughter bouncing around like nothing had cracked. No one knew what I had just heard. No one saw the storm that pressed against my chest. I smiled when a cousin brushed past me, though it felt like stretching a mask over broken glass. I carried a storm inside me, but they all saw a polite smile. Aunt Lorraine lifted her glass, the sparkle catching the light. "To family," she said warmly. "To family," voices echoed. I raised my glass, lips curling upward, but my hand trembled just enough that I gripped the stem harder. I remembered a saying I once read. Sometimes silence is the best way to let them underestimate you. Tonight, silence would be my cover, at least for now. The toasts began. One by one, relatives stood, voices rising above the clink of spoons against plates. "I want to recognize Calvera," my cousin announced, lifting his glass high. "To Calvera, the true strength of this family." Cheers burst across the room. My parents beamed, their glasses lifted proudly in her direction. I sat frozen, not a single word about me. Another uncle leaned forward, smiling broadly. "She's like the daughter we always dreamed of." My throat tightened. And what am I? Just the daughter they forgot they had. I took a sip of water, forcing my face neutral, though heat burned at the back of my neck. As the meal wound down, people mingled across the hall, voices blending into a hum. That was when Tyrion Crowell, my father's cousin, stopped near me with a drink in his hand. He wasn't unkind, just careless. "Well," he said with a laugh, "at least you've got Calvera. She's the one who makes the family proud." A silence followed. A few eyes darted to me, then away. My cheeks flushed hot. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I murmured, setting down my glass. My voice wavered slightly, betraying more than I wanted. I walked away, but his words trailed me like a shadow. It wasn't just my immediate family who saw me as secondary. Even those on the edges of kinship placed Calvera in the center. There's a truth I had read once. It's a terrible thing to be made invisible in your own home, and here I was, living it. I moved toward the back of the hall, where the noise dulled, but my mind wasn't quiet. Memories rose up, uninvited. High school. I had spent months building a science fair project, only for my parents to leave halfway through the awards to watch Cassian's basketball game. I had won second place that night. No one noticed. College graduation. My friends received cars or trips abroad. My parents handed me a modest book of checks. They smiled, proud but distracted, already planning Calvera's wedding gift, a down payment on a house. I breathed slowly, anchoring myself in the present. The sting of those moments had dulled over time, but tonight, with Calvera's voice echoing in my mind and my family's laughter ringing in my ears, the pain sharpened all over again. The truth was stark. This family had never truly seen me. I stood near the porch door, the night air tempting, my chest tight from the noise inside. I looked back at the glowing windows of the farmhouse, voices spilling through like warmth meant for someone else. They could erase me from their stories, I whispered under my breath, but they couldn't erase the truth I carried. And I knew, the next time I opened my mouth, it wouldn't be silence they heard. It would be fire. I couldn't eat. After Tyrion's careless comment and the toasts that had painted me invisible, every bite tasted like ash, so I wandered through the farmhouse, my shoes clicking softly against the wood floors. The hallway lights glowed dim, the kind of yellow that makes old wallpaper look older, and from the dining hall behind me, the laughter kept rolling, like nothing had shifted. When you've been cut enough times, silence feels safer than staying at the table. I let that thought settle as I traced the edge of the wall with my fingertips. The family photo under the oak, the chair at dinner near the kitchen door, the gifts brushed aside, it all layered itself in my chest. Anger mixed with clarity, a strange calm that told me to observe, to collect, to wait. I wasn't going to flail or cry in front of them. Not anymore. As I passed the guest wing, a voice floated through one of the doors. Calvera's. At first, I thought it was just small talk, her usual polished tone. But then I heard my name. She's just a burden. They'll never trust her with anything. My breath caught, and I froze mid-step. A muffled reply followed, her mother's voice. You've done well. Keep them close. Keep her where she can't interfere. I pressed myself to the wall, every nerve awake. I held my breath, afraid even the creak of the floorboards would betray me. I'd been erased from toasts and photos. Now I was erased from the future. I leaned closer, each word stretched out like the strike of a hammer. Then more. Keeping her makes us look generous, like we care. That's her only use. The cruelty of it almost made me stumble. My stomach clenched. My mind raced back to the many times kindness toward me had been reframed as pity. The extra chair they added at family dinners, the condescending nods when I gave something handmade. It had all been cast as charity. There's a line I once read, the cruelest way to destroy someone is not to hate them, it's to pity them. And in that moment, I realized I had been cast in this family as their perpetual charity case. I pulled away from the door, trembling, my hand gripping the frame for balance. Humiliation burned hot, but so did something sharper. Anger, yes, but anger that could be honed. I retreated down the hall, into the small guest room I'd been given. I shut the door softly, pressed my back against it, and let the silence wrap around me. My hand shook as I sat at the desk, replaying every word. They wanted me erased quietly, I whispered to the empty room. But silence is a dangerous weapon in the right hands. I decided I wouldn't confront her now. That would be too easy for her, too dramatic for them. No, I'd wait. I'd gather proof. I'd strike where it hurt the most. I opened my journal, the one I'd carried for years, and wrote slowly, each letter scratching into the page. They called me a burden. Soon, they'll call me something else. The ink smeared under my palm, my grip so tight the pen nearly split. I stared at the words, breathing hard, then set the pen down. What they didn't know was that I had just decided to stop playing the quiet daughter. The dining hall behind me hummed with voices and clinking glasses, but I had no appetite left. Every word I had overheard still pressed against me like a bruise that wouldn't fade. My legs carried me without much thought, and I found myself drifting toward the back of the house. A sliver of yellow light spilled from under the door of my father's study. I paused. That door had been locked more times than not when I was a child, a place where decisions about money, property, and family were carved out. Tonight, it stood ajar. The smell of cigar smoke lingered, stale and bitter, mixing with the faint polish of old oak. Papers lay scattered across the desk, the heavy chair slightly pushed back. My pulse quickened. Curiosity isn't always innocent. Sometimes it's survival. Secrets, I whispered to myself, are like paper. They tear easily once you touch them. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. On the desk sat a thick envelope stamped with my father's handwriting. Estate revision. My hand trembled as I pulled it open. Sheets of legal text spilled out. An updated will. My eyes moved quickly down the page until they landed on the names. Cassian, Calvera, everything. The farmhouse, the land, the accounts, even heirlooms I remembered my grandmother promising me, all assigned to them. My name was absent. I gripped the paper tighter. I wasn't just being ignored at the table. I was being erased from the family ledger. I could almost hear my father's voice, rational and firm. For the good of the family, stability is ensured with Cassian's household. And then my own answer flared within me. My existence reduced to instability. The words blurred as my throat tightened. Rage and heartbreak tangled together. I shifted another page, and then my stomach dropped further. Notes scribbled in the margins, words sharp and dismissive. Exclude Evadne. Too emotional. Risk for assets. It wasn't my father's handwriting. It was Calvera's, her tidy, slanted script, the same one she used to sign thank you cards, the same one she had used on place cards at her wedding. My knees weakened, and I leaned hard against the desk to steady myself. She wasn't just my rival. She was the author of my disappearance. The ink of her pen had cut me out, stroke by stroke. I closed my eyes, flashes rushing back. Every smirk when I stumbled, every generous gesture framed as though she were keeping me afloat. Now it was written proof. I had been declared unworthy on paper, executed in ink. The pen had become her weapon, and she had wielded it with precision. My chest burned as I carefully placed the documents back into their envelope, aligning them exactly as they had been. No one could know I'd been here. Not yet. I whispered into the stillness. Let them think I am blind. The blind often see clearer when the time comes. I shut the envelope and straightened my back. For the first time that night, I spoke a vow aloud. I will not be erased. Napoleon's words echoed in my memory. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. They thought they had buried me under silence. But silence was a dangerous weapon in the right hands, and mine were no longer trembling. I tucked the journal I carried close against my chest, a reminder of who I was beyond their revisions. As I stepped out into the hallway, my heart thundered. Every nerve felt alive, every step measured. The knowledge I carried burned hotter than any flame. Then, her voice. Calvera's heels clicked softly against the wood, drawing closer, her laughter still fresh from the dining hall. She was coming toward the study. I pressed into the shadows, pulse quickening, breath held tight. The woman who signed my erasure was now steps away, and I was done being silent. I slipped out of the study before Calvera reached the door. My heart still pounded from the discovery of those papers, the ink that had cut my name away. Outside, the air was cooler, the kind of night air that presses against your skin like a reminder that the world moves on, no matter how heavy your thoughts. The laughter inside drifted out in muffled bursts whenever the porch door opened, reminding me that while my world tilted, theirs stayed firmly in place. I leaned against the railing, staring at the dark line of trees at the edge of the farm. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes it's suffocation. Tonight, it felt like both. I thought about the will, about the way my family had quietly redrawn history while I was still alive to watch. A part of me wondered if I should simply walk away, let them have the house, the legacy, the endless performance of unity. Maybe the strongest move was to cut free completely. But another part, the part that still remembered the sting of Calvera's words, clenched its fist. The screen door opened softly, and I heard the familiar shuffle of slippers. My grandmother, Vera, stepped out into the night. Her frame was smaller now, her shoulders slightly hunched, but her eyes carried the same sharpness they always had. "You've been gone too long," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside mine. "I just needed air," I answered, my voice low. She studied me, her hands folded in her lap. "Child, I've lived long enough to know. Silence breaks people. Don't let it break you." I blinked back the sting of tears. What if I already am broken? She reached across and squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Then you learn how to stand in pieces. That's where courage begins. Her words dug deeper than she knew. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe in her presence, to feel the quiet protection she offered without judgment. The family you're born into, she added, her voice soft but steady, is not always the family that saves you. Her grip loosened, but the warmth lingered. It was the first time that night I felt seen, not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as myself. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out something small, folded carefully. An embroidered handkerchief, the fabric worn, but the stitching still delicate. She placed it in my hand. This was your mother's, she said. She fought the same silence. This is yours now. I traced the stitches with my fingers. The initials sewn into the corner made my throat tighten. I could almost see my mother's hands at work, needle-piercing fabric late into the night. She endured, Vera continued, not by shouting, but by refusing to vanish. You come from women who do not disappear. The handkerchief felt heavier than cloth. It was an anchor, a reminder that my story was not beginning tonight. It was continuing one already written in resilience. I pressed it against my palm. They may have erased my name from their documents, but they could not erase the bloodline that carried me here. As I slipped the handkerchief into my pocket, I looked back toward the house. The windows glowed with warm light, shadows of bodies moving inside. I imagined the laughter, the wine glasses raised, Calvera's smile flashing like a victory banner. A sharp calm filled me. If they think I am weak, they will never see the storm coming. I straightened my shoulders. I wasn't going to walk away, not yet. This fight would not end in silence. Courage is grace under pressure, Hemingway once said, and tonight, grace would be my armor, pressure my forge. I stepped back toward the porch door, each stride steadier than the last. The handkerchief pressed against my leg with every step, a reminder of where I came from and what I carried forward. As I opened the door, Calvera's laugh rang out from the dining hall, loud, triumphant, echoing through the house as if she had already claimed victory. I paused in the doorway and whispered to myself, "Laugh while you can." Because tomorrow, I would no longer be the quiet daughter. They would hear me. When I stepped back into the house, the warmth of the porch still clinging to my skin, the mood inside had shifted. The air was heavier, the laughter louder, and the jokes a little sharper. Wine glasses clinked too often, voices rose with less restraint. People were beginning to stumble over their words, masks slipping the way they always do after enough alcohol. I lingered by the edge of the hallway, watching. Calvera moved gracefully through the crowd, as if she were the hostess rather than the guest. Then, without much notice, she slipped into a side room. That smug curve of her mouth told me everything. She wasn't finished. My instincts buzzed. This night isn't finished either. It's only sharpening. I drifted down the hallway toward the study. The door stood ajar again, faint light spilling over the floor. I pushed it open slowly, breath caught in my throat. The desk was no longer stacked with loose papers. It held a laptop, its screen glowing. Someone had left it open. I stepped closer, pulse quickening, and scanned the inbox that was pulled up. It was Calvera's. The subject line hit me first. Securing the legacy. I clicked. An email thread stretched across the screen, between Calvera and her parents, Halvard and Ismera. We must protect the legacy from Evadne, the message read. She's reckless. She must never control assets. My hands clenched on the desk. Another line scrolled into view. With her gone, the estate is safe in Cassian's hands, and yours by extension. The words blurred as fury flared in my chest. It wasn't paranoia. It was conspiracy. My throat tightened, but my mind snapped clear. I pulled my phone out, snapping quiet screenshots, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been before. This was proof, not just whispers behind doors or margins in wills. This was their own words, written plainly, betraying themselves. I shut the laptop gently, the click almost too loud in the silence. My heart thudded against my ribs as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. For the first time in days, I felt control press into my palm. I left the study, my footsteps quick but quiet. The hallway was dim, the wallpaper lined with family portraits that suddenly looked like mocking faces. That was when I heard them, my parents' voices, hushed but sharp. I pressed myself into the shadows. Brannick's voice came first. "It's better this way. Evadne isn't stable enough to carry the family." Alicia sighed, weary but firm. "She'll thank us one day when she realizes she can't handle responsibility. Cassian and Calvera, yes, they're strong enough. They'll hold it all together." Calvera's voice chimed in, smooth and sure. "Exactly. She's always been too fragile. This way, no one gets hurt." Every word slammed into me harder than the last. I thought Calvera was the thief, but my parents handed her the key. My breath came shallow, my body rigid against the wall. The betrayal I had feared was not only true, it was worse. My own blood had signed me away, convinced themselves I should be grateful for the erasure. For a moment, heartbreak threatened to crush me, but it didn't stay heartbreak. It shifted, solidifying into something sharper. I pulled back into the darker end of the hallway, trembling, but resolved. If my own parents could betray me so completely, then there was nothing left to lose. I pressed my palm against my pocket where the phone rested, warm against my skin. Their words, their signatures, their voices, proof enough to burn the foundation they had built. If my own blood would betray me, I whispered to myself, I had nothing left to lose. An old saying stirred in my memory. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Tonight, I was the tree. I straightened my shoulders and exhaled, a steady stream of air that carried the weight of years. They had buried me with silence, erased me with ink, laughed at me with toasts, but I was still standing, and now I carried fire in my pocket. I walked back toward the gathering, my head high, my steps deliberate. Faces blurred as I passed, but I felt the shift inside me solidify. They thought they'd buried me quietly, but they forgot. I know how to dig. Tomorrow, the silence they forced on me would break louder than any toast. The family gathered in the grand dining hall for the final toast, a ritual everyone treated as sacred. The long table gleamed under the chandelier, the crystal glasses catching its light. The smell of wine and roasted meat lingered, but the air was thick with something heavier, expectation. I sat near the end of the table, silent, my chair slightly apart as if by design. Calvera, as always, positioned herself beside Cassian, glowing with confidence. She leaned toward my parents, Brannick and Alicia, who smiled back as if she were the crown jewel of the night. I clasped my hands, keeping my voice still. I wasn't waiting to be called on. I was waiting for them to trip on their own pride. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. I repeated the verse in my head, the words wrapping around me like armor. Brannick stood, glass raised, to family, to legacy, to those who carry us forward. The table erupted in applause. My jaw tightened. They thought the legacy belonged only to some of us. Tonight, they would learn otherwise. Calvera stood when the noise settled. She smiled wide, the kind of smile meant for cameras, though none were here but our own eyes. Every family has its strengths, she began, her voice syrupy sweet. Then her gaze slid across the table, landing on me. And sometimes, its burdens. Laughter rippled, sharp as knives. Heads turned, eyes flicked in my direction before darting away. My fists tightened under the tablecloth, nails biting into my palms. The word again. Burden. They repeated it like gospel, a truth rehearsed until it was unquestionable. But I was about to rewrite the scripture. I didn't speak. Not yet. The silence inside me was no longer submission. It was momentum gathering speed. When the toast ended, people dispersed into smaller clusters, chatter rising again. I slipped into the hallway, needing air, needing distance. But Calvera followed. Her heels clicked behind me until I turned, and there she stood, arms folded, that smug smile fixed on her face. "This family works better without you," she said plainly, her tone almost casual. "Everyone knows it." I stared back, my throat dry, but I didn't answer. Her smirk deepened. "What? No protest? That's always been your role, hasn't it? To take what's given. to accept what you are. I didn't move, didn't speak. Silence swelled between us, heavy and deliberate. Inside my head, a thought struck with clarity. She thought she'd broken me. But silence is not surrender. It's the gathering of thunder. I turned away without a word, her laughter following me like a shadow. Back inside the hall, I walked with steady steps, face calm, though fire blazed behind my eyes. My phone in my pocket held the emails, proof of conspiracy. The handkerchief pressed against my leg, reminder of the women before me who had endured and refused to vanish. Betrayal, heritage, evidence. My arsenal. If they wanted a quiet daughter, they should have written one in a novel. I was real, and reality doesn't stay silent. I reached the far end of the hall just as Brannick lifted his glass again, calling for the final words of the night. The guests hushed, their eyes drawn forward, waiting for the polished speech about honor and legacy. I rose slowly, steadying my breath. The phone was warm in my hand, my voice ready, and that was when I decided their legacy would end tonight, not with a whisper, but with my voice. The room froze after my words. It was as though the chandelier's glow dimmed, though I knew it hadn't. Glasses hung in midair, half raised, suspended between toasts and tremors. Eyes widened, some darted away, others locked on me with disbelief. It's remarkable how truth doesn't echo. It drops like a stone, and everyone drowns in it. Calvera was the first to move. She curled her lips into a smile, too wide, too polished, as if by force alone she could stitch the room back together. But no one met her gaze. Chairs creaked as relatives shifted uncomfortably. My father, Brannick, cleared his throat. "Enough of this." His voice cracked, a sound I had never heard from him, and he faltered. The silence was thick enough to choke. Even Alicia, who always found words to smooth a rift, pressed her napkin to her lips and said nothing. Then Cassian stood. My brother had stayed quiet too long, his face carved in stone, unreadable. The scrape of his chair startled the room. He looked at Calvera, not at me, not at our parents. His jaw tightened. "You lied to me," he said, his voice steady but low. She blinked, her practiced calm slipping. "Cassian, please!" "You lied to all of us." His words were louder now, cutting through the still air. Gasps fluttered around the table. My hand tightened around my phone, heart pounding as if it would burst. He reached for his ring finger, tugged at the gold band. In one deliberate motion, he slid it off and placed it flat on the table in front of her. The sound of metal on wood echoed like a gavel. For years, I thought he never saw me. Tonight, he saw enough to break. Calvera's face crumpled, her mask cracking. She glanced at my parents as if they might intervene, but even Brannick was still, eyes fixed on the ring. The ring left behind wasn't just jewelry, it was the collapse of her control. She whispered, desperate now. "Cassian, don't do this in front of everyone." But the damage was done. The symbol sat between them, shining brighter than any words. My parents rose next, scrambling to salvage dignity. Brannick's voice carried, strained. This is being twisted. We made choices for the stability of the family. You all must understand." A cousin muttered from the far end, loud enough to carry. "They erased their own daughter." Whispers exploded into the air. My father's cheeks reddened. He tried to speak again, but stopped, throat working. Alicia's eyes welled, and for once, her tears didn't soften anything, they hardened the shame. She dabbed at her face, unable to mask it. For the first time in my life, my parents looked small. The shame of exposure sat heavier on them than any private conversation ever could. They were stripped bare before the very family they sought to impress. The room fractured. Some relatives leaned in, whispering to one another. Others stood back, choosing silence. Tyrion Crowell, the same uncle whose careless words once cut me, shook his head and muttered, "We should have seen this coming." Some avoided my gaze altogether, too rattled to pick a side. Others nodded at me, quietly affirming what they had suspected but never dared to say. I stood tall, not raising my voice, not needing to. The evidence, the papers, the emails, their own words, had spoken louder than rage ever could. "Facts are stubborn things," John Adams once said. Tonight, facts were iron chains, pulling every falsehood down with them. I breathed evenly, steady in the storm. The murmur of division thickened. Calvera's face turned from pale to flushed red, her fists trembling at her sides. Finally, she slammed her glass down, the crack sharp against the table. Wine splashed across the white linen, a red stain spreading like spilled blood. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice trembling with venom. "You have no idea what you've started." The room went silent again, waiting. I met her gaze, unblinking. Then let it start. Because from here on, I wasn't the one on trial. They were. The farmhouse was unrecognizable in the silence. Hours earlier, it had been alive with shouts, glasses raised, laughter forced too loudly. Now, chairs sat pushed back unevenly, a tablecloth stained with wine bunched at the corner, and empty glasses glittered like forgotten evidence. The air still carried the echo of arguments, half-sentences, accusations hanging like smoke. I walked through the hall slowly, my steps crunching on a shard of glass missed during the hurried cleanup. Truth leaves wreckage, but sometimes wreckage clears the way for something stronger. I was exhausted, but strangely calm. Chaos had burned through me, leaving clarity behind. I lowered myself into one of the dining chairs, looking across the room that had once defined who belonged and who didn't. Tonight, it no longer had power over me. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to force a smile or make myself smaller. The storm had stripped away pretense, and I was still standing. "I don't need your approval, only truth." I had said it earlier in front of all of them, but now I whispered it again, savoring each word as though I were sealing it into my bones. I repeated it louder, my voice bouncing off the empty walls. "I don't need your approval." The quiet answered me, and I realized I no longer craved their nods or applause. My worth didn't hang on their inheritance, their signatures, or their biased stories. My worth was mine to claim. "I am not what happened to me," I whispered, recalling Jung's words. "I am what I choose to become." It sank deep into me like a truth I'd always known but never spoken. Tonight, I was choosing. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure move. Ivara Quell, my distant cousin, stepped hesitantly into the room. She had kept silent most of the night, eyes lowered as chaos flared. Now, she walked toward me, her voice almost tentative. "You did what I never could," she said, sitting across from me. "You stood up to them." Her words startled me more than the shouting had earlier. I stared at her, unsure if I should believe it. I finally said, "Sometimes silence isn't patience. Sometimes it's prison." She nodded, her eyes wet, but steady. "You freed more than yourself tonight." The conversation wasn't long, but it was enough. It wasn't just me. Others had felt the choke of this family's weight, but they had never dared to break it. That realization lifted something from my chest. Ivara reached out, touching my hand briefly before standing. "Thank you," she whispered, before disappearing down the hall. Her words lingered like a soft flame. Recognition, validation, maybe even the start of something bigger than myself. I rose, moving toward the guest room where my small overnight bag sat by the bed. I folded my clothes neatly, slid my journal inside, and zipped it shut. My eyes lingered on the walls, the window frames, the shadows of a house that had shaped me. "This house holds my childhood," I said softly, "but it doesn't hold my future." I lifted the bag and paused at the door. Memories pressed in, running down the hallway as a child, Christmas mornings, my mother's piano echoing through these rooms. But tonight, all of that was layered with betrayal, choices that cut me out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly, the soft click of the latch sounding more final than any shout could have. It was my declaration. I wasn't lingering in broken ties. I was walking away. The night air met me cool and sharp as I stepped off the porch. The handkerchief Vera had given me pressed against my pocket, its fabric light but anchoring me like a weight of steel. My anchor of strength, passed down by women who endured but refused to vanish. I looked up at the stars, their silence brighter than any toast, and drew a breath that filled me completely. "I left with no title," I said under the breath of the night. "No inheritance, no approval. But I left whole." And for the first time I wondered, Not what I had lost, but what I could finally begin. Morning came with a sharp stillness that pressed against my skin as I opened my eyes. The farmhouse was eerily quiet, as if the walls themselves had swallowed the shouts, the shame, and the unraveling of the night before. For a long moment, I lay still, listening to the silence. No footsteps, no laughter, no forced speeches. Only the creak of the old beams settling into daylight. I rose and walked through the house. Chairs stood pushed back at odd angles, glasses half filled with stale wine scattered like abandoned soldiers. A crust of bread hardened on a plate. A patch of red wine stained the linen where Calvera had slammed her glass. The place smelled of ash, though no fire had burned. The night had stolen their power. Morning would seal it. I felt no guilt. None of this belonged to me anymore, and I realized I didn't want it. The guilt, the shame, the legacy, they belonged to them. I carried only the truth. Gloria Steinem's words surfaced in my mind. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Last night, it had enraged me. This morning, it steadied me. I was calm, ready. As I entered the main room, I found Brannick and Alicia waiting. My father's eyes were hollow, my mother's hair unpinned, her hands trembling around a folded napkin. "We did what we thought was best for the family," Brannick said finally, his voice low, a fraction of the authority it once held. "For the family?" I said, stepping closer. "Families don't erase daughters. They fight for them." Alicia's eyes darted toward the floor. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I pulled my phone from my pocket, placed it on the table, and slid it toward them. Screenshots filled the screen, the emails, the plans, the betrayal in their own words. "You didn't lose me because I was weak. You gave me away because it was convenient." Before they could respond, Calvera swept into the room. Her hair was still flawless, her blouse crisp, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "This has gone far enough," she snapped. "They'll never believe you outside this house. You're nothing without their name." I met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "I don't need their name. I won't inherit your silence. I'll inherit my own freedom." Her mouth opened to retort, but no words came. For the first time, she had no audience. I turned away, my decision already made. In the living room, family portraits lined the wall, generations smiling stiffly in posed rows. My eyes landed on the most recent one, taken under the oak tree. There I was, shoved to the edge, barely visible. I lifted it gently from the wall. I didn't smash it. I didn't tear it apart. Instead, I slipped it into my bag. I didn't steal a memory. I reclaimed myself. With my bag packed, the handkerchief folded safely in my pocket, I stepped outside. Dawn broke over Spokane's hills, the sky painted with pink and gold. My breath rose into the cool air, carrying away the weight of everything I'd left behind. "They thought they took everything from me," I whispered, gripping the strap of my bag. But what they gave me was freedom to start again. Lena Horne's words echoed in me. "It is not the load that breaks you down. It's the way you carry it." I had carried their scorn, their pity, their silence, and now I set it down. I walked forward, not broken, not erased, but whole. This reunion was never about legacy. It was about power. And now I owned mine. I left the farmhouse without looking back, my steps steady, my voice finally free. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the author of my own legacy. Morning came with a sharp stillness that pressed against my skin as I opened my eyes. The farmhouse was eerily quiet, as if the walls themselves had swallowed the shouts, the shame, and the unraveling of the night before. For a long moment, I lay still, listening to the silence. No footsteps, no laughter, no forced speeches. Only the creak of the old beams settling into daylight. I rose and walked through the house. Chairs stood pushed back at odd angles, glasses half filled with stale wine scattered like abandoned soldiers. A crust of bread hardened on a plate. A patch of red wine stained the linen where Calvera had slammed her glass. The place smelled of ash, though no fire had burned. The night had stolen their power. Morning would seal it. I felt no guilt. None of this belonged to me anymore, and I realized I didn't want it. The guilt, the shame, the legacy, they belonged to them. I carried only the truth. Gloria Steinem's words surfaced in my mind. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Last night, it had enraged me. This morning, it steadied me. I was calm, ready. As I entered the main room, I found Brannick and Alicia waiting. My father's eyes were hollow, my mother's hair unpinned, her hands trembling around a folded napkin. "We did what we thought was best for the family," Brannick said finally, his voice low, a fraction of the authority it once held. "For the family?" I said, stepping closer. "Families don't erase daughters. They fight for them." Alicia's eyes darted toward the floor. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I pulled my phone from my pocket, placed it on the table, and slid it toward them. Screenshots filled the screen, the emails, the plans, the betrayal in their own words. "You didn't lose me because I was weak. You gave me away because it was convenient." Before they could respond, Calvera swept into the room. Her hair was still flawless, her blouse crisp, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "This has gone far enough," she snapped. "They'll never believe you outside this house. You're nothing without their name." I met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "I don't need their name. I won't inherit your silence. I'll inherit my own freedom." Her mouth opened to retort, but no words came. For the first time, she had no audience. I turned away, my decision already made. In the living room, family portraits lined the wall, generations smiling stiffly in posed rows. My eyes landed on the most recent one, taken under the oak tree. There I was, shoved to the edge, barely visible. I lifted it gently from the wall. I didn't smash it. I didn't tear it apart. Instead, I slipped it into my bag. I didn't steal a memory. I reclaimed myself. With my bag packed, the handkerchief folded safely in my pocket, I stepped outside. Dawn broke over Spokane's hills, the sky painted with pink and gold. My breath rose into the cool air, carrying away the weight of everything I'd left behind. "They thought they took everything from me," I whispered, gripping the strap of my bag. But what they gave me was freedom to start again. Lena Horne's words echoed in me. "It is not the load that breaks you down. It's the way you carry it." I had carried their scorn, their pity, their silence, and now I set it down. I walked forward, not broken, not erased, but whole. This reunion was never about legacy. It was about power. And now I owned mine. I left the farmhouse without looking back, my steps steady, my voice finally free. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the author of my own legacy.